Health violations are another major issue at these checkpoints and in the occupation in general. Here you can see a Palestinian green and white plated ambulance that's pulling over to the side of a road to allow a yellow plated Israeli vehicle privilege priority on that road. And these ambulances will sometimes wait for hours before reaching the checkpoints themselves. And when they get there, they're oftentimes not sort of rushed through quickly, but actually held at gunpoint, as you can see in this photograph, while another soldier will go around the back to sort of screen through the back of the ambulance. And the reasoning given for holding up ambulances oftentimes even longer than average civilian vehicles is that apparently in the past these ambulances have been used to transport weapons or people wanted by the Israeli government. Well, I've done a little research on the subject and discovered that actually there is one documented case of a Palestinian ambulance being abused for these purposes. But even if they were being used for these purposes, even if that was the case, remember that this Palestinian ambulance is traveling from a Palestinian village to a Palestinian city. It's not traveling from the West Bank into Israel, and that is where these checkpoints are located, between Palestinian built-up areas, such that in what way is holding up this ambulance endangering the lives of the people in back of it? In what way is this contributing to the safety or the security of the Israeli population, let alone the entire Palestinian population? This is the checkpoint outside of the village of Deir Balut where I spent some time, and this checkpoint is open from 7 in the morning until 7 at night. What that means is that if you have any kind of an emergency between the hours of 7 p.m. and 7 a.m., well, you're kind of out of luck. And in fact, what happened was that a woman from the village who was 7 months pregnant with twins began to have contractions at 1 o'clock in the morning. Her husband drove her frantically to the checkpoint, which they needed to cross to reach the nearest hospital in the city of Ramallah, an hour away. They got to the checkpoint, and the soldiers who sleep above it came down to meet them and were very polite. And they said, look, the rule is very clear. Palestinians are not allowed through until 7 in the morning. Please come back at 7. Well, the woman obviously couldn't wait 6 hours to have her babies, and so they argued a bit more. And the soldiers, again, they were very polite and even apologetic, and they just kept saying the same thing over and over again. They said, look, we didn't make the rules. We don't even agree with them. We're just following orders. We're just following orders. This is something I hear from soldiers almost daily. We're just following orders, and that's exactly what the soldiers were doing. At that point, the husband decided to call an ambulance to come from Ramallah City, an hour away, to the checkpoint, so that all it would take would be for his wife to walk by foot from her own vehicle across the checkpoint to the ambulance. Ambulance arrives an hour later, and the soldiers come down shaking their heads, and they say, look, it doesn't matter if you're going by foot or by car, you're still Palestinian, it's still the middle of the night, you still can't cross. At that point, they're sort of tearing their hair out, and the husband decides to call all of his friends, and he, like many Palestinians, had actually worked in Israel, speaks Hebrew, and was able to contact an Israeli friend that had a connection to the army that was high enough such that they were able to get this woman permission to cross the checkpoint and to get to the hospital. The soldiers allowed her through. They wouldn't allow her husband to go with her. She got to the ambulance and immediately began to give birth to the twins. And the twins were born, both of them alive and basically healthy, except, of course, that they were 2 months premature. And because they were premature, they were in desperate need of hospital attention. And because they were an hour away on a bumpy road in the middle of the night, having waited almost 2 hours at the checkpoint, they weren't able to reach the hospital in time. And because of this, both of this woman's babies died. And I tell this story not because it's heartbreaking and not because I'm trying to demonize these soldiers. Look, I believe in the Nuremberg principles, that people are responsible for their actions even if they are following orders. That said, what I think is the greatest crime of all is not so much the acts of the individual soldiers who might be nicer or meaner, but the system itself. The fact that things are structured this way such that there are even soldiers there to begin with who control whether or not a person can go to the hospital. That to me is the greatest crime.